She handed me a folded piece of paper across the kitchen table like it was nothing. Like it was a grocery list or a reminder to pick up the dry cleaning. And I sat there, staring at it because I already knew. The way you know when the temperature drops right before a storm. The way you know when someone's voice goes just a little too flat, just a little too rehearsed. I already knew that whatever was on that paper was going to burn everything I thought I knew about my family, right down to the foundation. I looked up at her. My mother. The woman who raised me. The woman who braided my hair every Sunday morning until I was 12 years old, who drove me 45 minutes each way to dance class in Memphis traffic without complaining once, who cried at my high school graduation like I'd just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And she was sitting there with her hands folded in her lap and her jaw set tight, and she wouldn't look me in the eye. That's when I knew it wasn't just bad news. That's when I knew it was a betrayal. A real one. The kind that doesn't heal clean. I unfolded the paper. It took me 3 full reads to understand what I was looking at. And when I finally understood it, when the words stopped swimming and my brain stopped rejecting what my eyes were telling it, I felt something shift inside me that I don't have words for even now. It wasn't just hurt. It wasn't just anger. It was the particular, nauseating feeling of realizing that the story of your own life has been a lie, and that the people who were supposed to love you most were the ones holding the pen. My name is Cassandra Lynn Beaumont. Most people call me Cassie. I am 34 years old, and up until 14 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, the real Memphis, not the tourist version with Beale Street and barbecue joints and blues music floating out of every door. I mean the Memphis of ordinary streets and ordinary houses, of church on Sunday and sweet tea in the summer, and the particular humidity that makes even a short walk to the mailbox feel like a personal insult from God. We lived on Primrose Court, a dead-end street in Midtown, in a brick ranch house with a porch swing and a backyard that flooded every spring without fail. My mother, Diane Beaumont, worked as an office manager for a dental practice on Poplar Avenue for 22 years. My father, Gerald Beaumont, drove trucks long haul for most of my childhood, disappearing Monday morning and reappearing Friday night smelling like diesel fuel and truck stop coffee, bringing gas station candy and a big loud laugh that made the whole house feel smaller and warmer all at once. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were the particular American kind of comfortable that requires constant maintenance, where you never go without, but you also never stop watching the numbers, never stop calculating, never stop making quiet sacrifices that you don't mention, because mentioning them would feel like complaining, and complaining would feel ungrateful. My mother clipped coupons until I was in high school. My father fixed the truck himself in the driveway every time it broke down rather than paying a mechanic. We took one vacation a year, usually Gulf Shores, Alabama, in a rented beach house that smelled like sunscreen and mildew, and we loved every single second of it. I was the middle child. My older brother, Tyler, was 3 years ahead of me. My younger sister, Ashley, came 4 years behind. We were close in the way that kids who share walls and a bathroom and a single television are close, which is to say we fought constantly and loved each other ferociously in that unspoken, never discussed way that Southern families tend to operate. You didn't say, "I love you" every day. You said it by showing up, by not leaving, by being there. School was fine. I wasn't spectacular. I got B's, pulled the occasional in English and history, bombed pre-calculus twice. I had friends, a group of girls who I've mostly lost touch with now, a couple of boyfriends who don't bear mentioning, a guidance counselor named Mrs. Patterson who told me I had a real gift for empathy and suggested I look into social work or counseling, which I thought was the most boring possible future and rejected immediately. I wanted to do something that mattered. I just didn't know what yet. After high school, I spent 2 years at Southwest Tennessee Community College, mostly spinning my wheels, before I transferred to the University of Memphis and got serious. I graduated with a degree in communications at 24, took a job at a small marketing agency downtown, fell in love with the analytics side of things, taught myself digital marketing, and by 28, I had clawed my way into a mid-level position at a regional healthcare marketing firm called Prima Care Solutions, where I made decent money for the first time in my life and started to feel like things were, finally, clicking into place. I had an apartment on Cooper Street, second floor, exposed brick, a balcony I could just barely fit 2 chairs on, that I was stupidly proud of. I had a cat named Walter. I had a boyfriend named Marcus Webb, who was 37, a high school football coach in Germantown, broad-shouldered and patient and funny in this dry, quiet way that snuck up on you. We'd been together 2 years, and things were serious but unhurried, which felt exactly right. I had a good life. A real, solid, earned life. Nothing flashy. Nothing extraordinary. Just mine. My relationship with my family was fine. It was the particular kind of fine that adult children of emotionally reserved parents develop, where you love each other, and you show up for the big moments, and you avoid certain subjects by silent mutual agreement. My dad had retired from driving a few years back, and he and my mother had settled into a comfortable, quiet routine on Primrose Court. The same house, the same porch swing, smaller grocery bills now that all three of us were out of the house. Tyler had moved to Nashville for work. He was in commercial real estate and doing well, drove a nice truck, had a wife named Brittany and 2 kids under 5. Ashley was still in Memphis, working as a dental hygienist, married to a guy named Kevin Marsh, who I personally found a little dull, but who was perfectly decent and clearly loved her. We all got together for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and their occasional birthday. We texted in a group chat that was mostly memes and weather complaints. It was ordinary. It was enough. Until it wasn't. And before I tell you what happened next, before I take you into the worst 14 months of my life and the most important, I want to take a second to talk to you. If you've been riding with me on this channel, you already know I don't do this for the numbers. I do it because these stories are real, and real people need to hear them. So if this one is hitting, if you felt something in that opening, do me a favor and hit subscribe so you don't miss a single story. Drop a like and share this with somebody. I promise you, whoever you're thinking of right now, they need to hear what's coming. And leave me a comment. Tell me what city you're listening from, what country you're in, and what time it is right where you are, because I genuinely, truly want to know how far these stories travel. Every comment you leave tells me this is worth it. All right, let's get back into Cassie's story. It started with a phone call. The way most things in families start, not with a dramatic confrontation or a moment you can look back on and say, that's where it began, but with something small. Something that seems routine right up until it isn't. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. I was on my balcony on Cooper Street with a glass of red wine and Walter purring on my lap when my phone lit up with my mother's name. This was not unusual. My mother called every week or two, short, practical calls where we covered the basics. How's work? How's Marcus? Did you get the recipe I texted you? Did Tyler's kids have colds last week? She was not a woman who used the phone to have long emotional conversations. That was simply not who she was. So I picked up expecting the usual. And for the first 3 minutes it was the usual. She asked about work. I told her about a new account we'd landed, a hospital group in Jackson, Tennessee. She made the appropriate appreciative sounds. She mentioned that the backyard had flooded again. I said, Mama, you need to just call somebody about the drainage. It's been 30 years. And she made the sound she always made when she was dismissing practical advice. This little noncommittal that meant she heard me and had already decided not to do anything. And then there was a pause. Not a normal pause, not the kind where someone's just collecting their next thought, but the kind where someone has been building up to something and has just arrived at the edge of it and can't quite make themselves jump. I know that pause now. I've replayed it so many times that I could draw a picture of it. Cassie, she said, I need you to come home this weekend. Just you, don't bring Marcus. I asked her what was going on. I'll tell you when you get here, just come. That was it. That was all she'd give me. I spent the next 4 days running through every possible scenario. My father was sick. There was money trouble. Someone was getting divorced. Tyler had done something. Ashley had done something. My mother had done something. The house was being sold. There'd been an accident and they'd kept it from me. I went through the list obsessively, adding and discarding, the way you do when anxiety has nowhere productive to go and turns itself into a kind of terrible creative exercise. Marcus asked me what was wrong, and I told him my mother wanted to see me, and I didn't know why yet. He offered to drive me. I said she'd specifically said just me. He didn't push it, which was one of the things I loved about him. He understood when a thing was between me and my family, and didn't try to insert himself. I drove down to Memphis on a Saturday morning. 3 hours there from my apartment. Familiar drive, I-40 west, then into the city. The sky was flat and gray and the trees were bare, and Memphis coming up over the flat Tennessee landscape looked exactly like it always had, which was somehow both comforting and deeply unsettling, given what I didn't know was waiting for me. I pulled into the driveway on Primrose Court at noon. My mother's car was there. My father's truck was gone. I registered that but didn't think anything of it. He was probably running errands. I let myself in. The house smelled like coffee, and the particular mix of candles my mother had burned in the kitchen for my entire life. Something vaguely cinnamon and something vaguely vanilla. And for a second, standing in the entryway with my keys in my hand, it smelled so exactly like childhood that my chest ached with it. My mother was at the kitchen table. She had her hands folded in front of her, and a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking, and an expression I had never seen on her face before. Controlled, yes, the way she always was, but also raw underneath it, the way something gets raw when it's been rubbed too long. There was a folded piece of paper on the table between us. She said, "Sit down, Cassie." I sat. She pushed the paper toward me. "Read this first, then I'll talk." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at her. Then I looked at the paper. And I already told you what it felt like when I finally understood what I was reading. So let me tell you now what it actually said. It was a letter. Handwritten. 5 pages, folded into quarters, the paper soft and a little worn, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. The handwriting was my father's. I'd know it anywhere, that particular combination of print and cursive that had signed my report card, permission slips, and birthday cards my entire life. But the date at the top was 35 years ago, and it was addressed to a woman named Sharon. Not my mother. I read every word. I read it 3 times, the way I told you. And what I understood by the end was this. 35 years ago, my father had been in love with another woman. A woman named Sharon Dillard, who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. A woman he'd met on one of his trucking routes when he was 26 years old and already married to my mother with Tyler, who was 3 at the time, at home in Memphis. And the letter was not just a love letter, though it was that too, and it was heartbreaking in the specific way that evidence of your parents' humanity is always heartbreaking. The letter was also an explanation. A goodbye. He was telling Sharon he couldn't leave his family. He was telling her he was sorry. He was telling her that she and the baby were the hardest thing he'd ever walked away from, and that he would think of them every day for the rest of his life. She and the baby. I looked up at my mother. She was watching me. "How long have you known?" I asked. 34 years, she said. 34 years. She had known for 34 years that my father had another child somewhere. A child who would be, I did the math in my head and it hit me like a physical thing, who would be right around my age. Maybe a year older. Maybe a year younger. Who else knows? I asked. Your father, and now you. Not Tyler. Not Ashley. Just me. And I didn't understand yet why me specifically. Why now specifically? And I asked her both of those questions in the same flat voice I get when I'm trying very hard to stay in control. My mother wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the place where the yard flooded every spring. Because, she said, she reached out about 3 weeks ago. The baby, she's not a baby anymore. Her name is Tiffany Dillard. She's 33 years old and she lives in Atlanta and she's been looking for her biological father for 2 years. And she found him. And she sent a letter to this address. I stared. And your father, my mother said, still looking at the yard, wants to meet her. He wants to be in her life. He wants to tell Tyler and Ashley. He wants to bring her to Thanksgiving. And here is the part I have never been fully able to explain without sounding either cold or crazy. So I'm going to try to say it as honestly as I can. My first feeling was not sympathy for Tiffany. It was not even anger at my father, not yet. My first feeling, the gut-level, bone-deep, involuntary first feeling, was a specific, searing jealousy. Not of Tiffany as a rival for my father's love, but of the fact that she had apparently been the reason he almost left. She had been the thing that mattered enough to write 5 pages about. She had been the thing he said he'd think about every day for the rest of his life. And I sat there in my childhood kitchen, and I had the terrible, shameful, completely human thought, what did that make the rest of us? What did it make my mother, who had apparently known and stayed and kept this secret for 34 years. What did it make me? I drove back to my apartment that night without eating the lunch my mother had obviously prepared. The spread was sitting on the counter when I finally stood up from the table, sandwich fixings and the good chips, the way she always set things out when she wanted to take care of you, without saying much of anything beyond the immediate logistics. What was going to happen now? What my mother wanted from me. Why she'd told me and not Tyler, not Ashley. She'd told me because she said I was the one who'd handle it. That was the word she used. Handle. She said Tyler would overreact and Ashley would fall apart, and that I was the one who handled things. That I always had been. I was not comforted by this. Being the one who handles things is its own kind of loneliness. Marcus was waiting at my apartment. I had texted him vaguely that things were heavy, and I'd explain when I got home. He had made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta, a green salad, bread, and he had left me alone for exactly as long as it took me to eat half a bowl before he looked at me and said, very quietly, "What happened?" I told him everything. All of it, the letter, Sharon Dillard, Tiffany, my mother's 34 years of silence, my father wanting Thanksgiving. I told him in one long, flat, almost expressionless monologue, the way I do when I'm overwhelmed and my brain switches over to pure information transfer mode. And when I was done, Marcus sat with it for a minute, really sat with it, which is something he was genuinely gifted at, that ability to not immediately fill silence with a response. And then he said, "How are you doing with it? Not how should you feel. How are you actually doing?" I burst into tears so suddenly and so completely that it startled Walter off the couch. I cried for a long time. Marcus just sat with me. He didn't try to fix it or frame it or make it make sense. He just kept his arm around me and let me work through it. And that was exactly right, and I want to say that here, because I don't think he gets enough credit in this story for being exactly who I needed. The next week was ugly in the quiet way that weeks are ugly when you're trying to live your normal life while sitting on a bomb. I went to work. I answered emails. I had a campaign review meeting on Wednesday that I barely tracked. I ate my lunches at my desk and stared out the window at downtown Memphis and thought about my father, not with anger yet, just with this dull, confused ache. This sense of a foundation being quietly moved under my feet while the house still looked the same from the outside. I didn't call him. He didn't call me. My mother had apparently not told him she'd told me, which I found out later, and which added its own complicated layer to everything. Tyler called me the following Thursday. Casual call, checking in, he said. He was in Nashville, just got back from showing a commercial property in Franklin. Brittany was making dinner. The kids were loud in the background. All normal. And he said, "Hey, Dad called me yesterday. Something's going on. He was weird on the phone, you know anything?" I made a decision in that moment. I said, "Not really. He seemed fine last time I talked to him." And I hated myself for it immediately, but I also understood why I did it. Because whatever was coming, it needed to come from my parents, not from me, and I wasn't going to be the one to drop it in Tyler's lap over a phone call while his kids screamed about dinner. Tyler said okay, and moved on, and we talked about nothing for another 10 minutes and hung up. Ashley texted me that same night, "Dad acting weird to anyone else or just me?" Followed immediately by a crying laughing emoji, and then, probably nothing, never mind. She did this, asked a real question, and then immediately deflated it, turned it into a joke before it could become a real thing. I said, "Just you, you're the weird one," followed by a heart, and she sent back a row of middle finger emojis, and that was that. My father called me on a Saturday, exactly 2 weeks after I'd sat at my mother's kitchen table, and asked if he could drive up to Memphis to see me. I said yes. He drove the 40 minutes from Primrose Court to my apartment on Cooper Street, and I buzzed him up, and he sat on my couch looking exactly like my father, and also somehow slightly smaller than my father. The way people sometimes shrink a little when they're carrying something heavy. And he looked at me and said, "Your mother told you." I said yes. He looked at his hands. I am going to give him what credit I can here, which is this. He did not make excuses. He did not deflect. He did not bring up how young he was or how different things were, or how he'd been confused or how my mother had known all along, and stayed, so what was the big deal? He sat on my couch and he said, "I made a decision when I was 26 years old that I have never fully reckoned with, and I should have reckoned with it a long time ago, and I'm sorry that it's come down to you finding out this way." Who is she? I asked. Tell me about her. So he told me. Sharon Dillard, she was a woman he'd met in Atlanta on his trucking route. She worked at a shipping depot near the airport. They'd known each other for about a year before things got serious. When she told him she was pregnant, he'd had about 3 months of what he called the worst kind of back and forth a man can put himself through. And in the end, he'd come home to Memphis and to my mother and to Tyler and stayed. Sharon had had the baby alone. She'd named her Tiffany. She'd raised her in Atlanta by herself, worked hard, made a good life. She'd never asked Gerald for a single thing, not money, not presents, nothing. And she'd been honest with Tiffany about who her father was from the time Tiffany was old enough to understand. And Tiffany found you, I said. She wrote me a letter. 6 months ago I sent one back. We've been writing back and forth, and she wants to meet, and I want to meet her. And I know that's a complicated thing to ask of you and your brother and your sister. Complicated. That was the word he used. Complicated. I looked at my father, and I saw him so clearly in that moment. Clearly in a way I hadn't since I was very young. As a complete person, not just as my father, but as a man who had made a genuinely terrible choice when he was young and scared, and had lived with the weight of it, and who was now 71 years old and apparently trying to right something before it was too late. And I felt not forgiveness, not yet, not anywhere close, but something adjacent to understanding. The smallest, least satisfying opening of a door. Does Tyler know? I asked. Not yet. Your mother and I are going to tell him and Ashley together. I wanted to tell you first because... He stopped. Because you're Cassie, he said. You're the one who can hold a thing steady. That phrase again. Handle it. Hold it steady. The specific loneliness of being the capable one. I told him I needed time. He nodded. He drove back to Primrose Court. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony in the November cold with Walter on my lap, and I thought, with absolute clarity, that something in my family was about to either break or be remade, and that those might end up being the same thing. My father told Tyler and Ashley the following weekend. I know this because Tyler called me about 45 minutes after the conversation, and Tyler Beaumont, excuse me, he doesn't share Kevin's last name. Tyler, who is 6'2" and coaches nobody and has lived his whole adult life with the particular confidence of a firstborn Southern man who's never really had his worldview seriously disturbed, was absolutely coming apart at the seams. Not sad. Not confused. Furious. He led with furious. Dad had a whole other kid, he said. And Mama knew, for 34 years, and they're just now telling us. Because what? Because this woman decided to show up. Because Dad wants to play happy family now. Who does that? What is that? I said, Tyler. I'm not done. I've been out there building my life, right? Working every day, raising my kids, doing things right. And Dad's been sitting on this thing for 30 years and now he just gets to decide it's time to deal with it because it's convenient for him? That's not how this works. I let him go. There was no interrupting Tyler in this mode. And more importantly, he wasn't entirely wrong. There was a legitimate grievance in there, buried under the fury, and it deserved to breathe. He talked for 20 minutes. By the end, he'd cycled through anger and landed, briefly, somewhere in the vicinity of hurt. Actual, real, vulnerable hurt, the kind Tyler never showed willingly. He said, I just feel like I didn't know who my dad was. You know, like I thought I knew who he was. Yeah, I said. I know. Ashley called me an hour later, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Ashley always processed grief through tears first and questions second. She wanted to know if I thought our parents were going to be okay. She wanted to know if Tiffany was nice. She wanted to know if this changed everything. I told her I didn't know yet on any of it, and I held her on the phone while she cried, the way I'd held her when she was 4 years old and had bad dreams. The first meeting with Tiffany was scheduled for February. My parents drove to Atlanta. Just them first, nobody else. My father had suggested that, wanting to see Tiffany alone with my mother before any larger family encounter. I thought that was actually the smartest thing he'd done in this whole situation, and I told him so, which surprised him. I tracked that Saturday obsessively. Texting my mother every few hours. Are you there yet? How's it going? How's she? How are you? My mother's texts were brief and factual, which told me everything and nothing. She's lovely. She looks like him. We had lunch. More later. She called me that night from a hotel in Atlanta. My parents had stayed overnight, which was a sign that things had gone better than disaster. She told me that Tiffany was 33 years old, worked in nonprofit fundraising for an education organization in Atlanta called Scholars First, had a warm personality and her father's laugh and her mother's eyes. She told me that Sharon Dillard had actually been there for part of the lunch, that Tiffany had asked if she could come, and my mother had agreed, and that sitting across from Sharon Dillard in a restaurant in Atlanta had been the strangest experience of my mother's life, but also, in some way she couldn't fully explain, not the worst. "She's not what I expected," my mother said. "What did you expect?" A long pause. "I don't know, something harder, something with more angles. She was just a person, a tired person, a person who made her peace with a difficult situation a long time ago and raised a good daughter." "And how do you feel about it?" I asked. "All of it. How do you actually feel?" My mother was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, 34 years ago, I made a choice to stay, and I've never regretted it. But I have wondered sometimes what would have happened if I'd asked your father to leave instead. And now I'm sitting in a hotel room in Atlanta and I've just had lunch with the woman he didn't choose and the child he walked away from. And I feel like the choice I made was right. And I also feel like it cost everyone something, and that's a complicated thing to sit with. That was the most my mother had ever said about her inner life in one unbroken stretch. I didn't interrupt it. I just listened. Things moved slowly after that, the way things do in families when everyone's processing on their own schedule. Tyler took months to come around even a little. He agreed to a family meeting in Memphis in March. Just us, without Tiffany yet, where my father sat at the kitchen table on Primrose Court and answered questions for 3 hours. Tyler asked most of them. Ashley cried through most of it. I sat between them and didn't say much and watched my father. Truly watched him, maybe for the first time as an adult, and saw a man doing the real, hard, unglamorous work of accountability that most people never actually do. At one point Tyler asked, "Did you love her, Sharon?" My father didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "Not the way I love your mother, but yes." Tyler got up from the table and went outside. He stood on the porch for about 15 minutes. When he came back in, he sat down and said, "Okay, what happens next?" And that, the simplicity of it, the decision to just move forward, even with the hurt still sitting right there on the table, that was probably the moment I started forgiving my father. Not completely. Not without conditions. But the beginning of it. What happened next was Tiffany. We met her in April, Tyler, Ashley, and I, in Nashville, which felt like neutral ground. My father and mother drove up from Memphis. Tiffany drove up from Atlanta, 6 hours on I-75 North and then I-24 West, which I later learned she'd made listening to true crime podcasts the whole way, which made me immediately like her. The restaurant was a place in East Nashville, a renovated house with mismatched furniture and a patio, and the kind of deliberately unfancy menu that means the food is actually extraordinary. It was a Saturday afternoon in late April, and the dogwoods were blooming, and Nashville was doing the thing Nashville does in spring, where it seems completely unreasonably beautiful. And we all sat around a big round table and looked at each other. Tiffany was, I want to describe her accurately because she deserves that. She was medium height, natural hair pulled back, a round face with high cheekbones that were absolutely our father's cheekbones. She wore a burnt orange blazer over a white shirt and small gold earrings. And she smiled with the careful, measured smile of someone who has prepared for a moment and is trying not to want too much from it. She was warm but not effusive. Direct but not aggressive. When she laughed, and she did laugh within the first 10 minutes at something Ashley said about the menu, it was my father's laugh. Not a little bit. Exactly. It came out of her mouth and hit the table and we all heard it at the same time, and there was this collective, stunned beat of silence where all three of us, Tyler, Ashley, me, looked at each other with the same expression, and Tiffany saw us do it and said, "Yeah, I've been told." Tyler, to his credit, laughed first. After that, something loosened. We talked for 4 hours. We went through drinks and appetizers and entrees and dessert and 2 rounds of coffee and didn't notice the time passing because the conversation was doing what conversations do when they're finally honest. It kept pulling the next thing out of you before you'd even fully finished the last thought. Tiffany told us about growing up in Atlanta. About her mother, Sharon, who had worked herself to exhaustion building a good life for her daughter and had never, not once, Tiffany said, not even when things were hardest, let bitterness about our father be the primary note in their home. She was sad sometimes, Tiffany said. I could see it, but she wasn't angry. She said being angry was a way of still letting him take up space, and she wasn't going to give him that for free. There was a silence after that. My father absorbed it without flinching, which I respected. I told Tiffany about growing up on Primrose Court, about the beach house at Gulf Shores, about my dad coming home on Friday nights with gas station candy. I watched her face while I told her those things, and I saw something move across it. Not resentment, not quite, more like the expression of someone hearing a song they always wondered about but never got to hear. She listened with her whole face, the way attentive people do, and when I was done she said, "He sounds like he was a good dad to you." "He was," I said. "That's good," she said. And she meant it. You could hear that she meant it. What I didn't expect, what none of us expected, was how naturally Tiffany fit. Not immediately, not perfectly, not without the rough edges and the moments of awkwardness that are inevitable when you're stitching together something this complicated. But there was something there. Some shared frequency. I don't want to over-romanticize it because that would cheapen it. It wasn't a movie moment where everyone immediately loves each other and every wound is healed by a lunch in Nashville. There were months of difficulty ahead. There was more therapy than I've admitted in this story. There was a specific, excruciating conversation I had with my mother in July, where I finally said out loud every complicated thing I'd been holding since that kitchen table in October. And she said some things back that broke me, and then put something back together. And we both cried in a way that neither of us had since I was a little girl. There was a night in August when I called Marcus from my car in a parking garage in downtown Memphis, unable to drive home, just overwhelmed by the accumulated weight of all of it, and he stayed on the phone with me for an hour and 20 minutes just being present, and it was one of the single most important hours of my adult life. There was Tyler, still working through his anger in October, a full year after I'd sat at that kitchen table, finally having a real one-on-one conversation with my father on the porch of the Primrose Courthouse, a conversation that I was not present for, and that Tyler has not told me fully about, but that ended with the two of them sitting in the porch swing together in the dusk, which his wife Brittany photographed from her car in the driveway because she knew something important was happening, and which is still, when I see that photo, the most complicated and beautiful thing I've ever looked at. And there was Ashley, who turned out to be the one who reached out to Tiffany independently, not at anyone's suggestion, just because Ashley is Ashley, because her heart moves faster than her head and she can't help it. And she texted Tiffany one random Wednesday in June saying, "I'm Ashley and I'm your sister and I don't really know what to do with that, but I'm glad you're here." And Tiffany texted back within 4 minutes and they were on the phone for 2 hours that night. Those two have a group chat now. Just them. I found out about it from Ashley, who mentioned something Tiffany had said, and I laughed so hard at the casual intimacy of it that I had to put my face in my hands. Thanksgiving happened. It was on Primrose Court, the same table, the same house, the porch swing, and the backyard that floods every spring. My mother cooked, she always cooks, it's her love language even when she won't say that out loud. And Tiffany drove up from Atlanta, and Tyler drove down from Nashville with Brittany, and the kids and Kevin came with Ashley, and Marcus came with me and Sharon Dillard. Yes, Sharon Dillard, because my mother had invited her, quietly and privately. In a phone call that I will never fully understand, because my mother is the most resilient person I have ever met, and I will spend the rest of my life not being worthy of her. Sharon Dillard sat at the Thanksgiving table on Primrose Court and ate my mother's cooking and watched her daughter be welcomed into a family she'd never known and seemed, by all accounts, to be at peace. My father cried before the blessing. He tried to cover it and couldn't. He stood at the head of the table and started to speak and his voice gave out and he just stood there for a moment, all of us watching him, and then he said, "I've done a lot of things wrong in my life, but I'm grateful, I am so, so grateful that the people in this room are still here." It wasn't an eloquent speech. It wasn't a resolution or a neat ending or a Hollywood moment. It was a man in his 70s, at a table too crowded for the room, being honest about the mess he'd made and the grace that had been extended to him anyway. There was a silence. Then Tyler, who'd spent a year being the angriest one in the room, who'd asked the hardest questions and demanded the most accounting. Tyler picked up his fork and said, "Mama, this sweet potato casserole might be the best thing I've ever eaten in my life." And my mother rolled her eyes at him and said, "It's the same recipe I've made for 30 years, Tyler James," and the table laughed and we ate. What I know now, on the other side of 14 months that were the hardest and most clarifying of my life, is this: betrayal is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of a reckoning. A forced, brutal, terrifying reckoning with the fact that the people you love are fully human, with all the damage and contradiction and capacity for both harm and grace that being fully human entails. My father is not the man I thought he was. He is something more complicated and less comfortable than that, and I love him anyway, which is a choice I make every day and which has taught me more about love than any easier version of it ever could. My mother is stronger than anything I have words for. Tiffany Dillard is, at this point, my sister. Not a half-sister, not an asterisk sister, not a complicated family situation sister. My sister. Full stop. And I, Cassandra Lynn Beaumont, am 34 years old, living on Cooper Street in Memphis, Tennessee, with a cat named Walter and a man named Marcus who I am going to marry. I've decided, though I haven't told him yet. And a family that is bigger and messier and more true than anything I could have put together on purpose. The paper my mother slid across the kitchen table was the worst and the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it asked me to hold something complicated and not let it break me, and I did. I held it. And what I found on the other side of holding it was not what I expected, not just hurt, not just healing, but the particular, irreplaceable, bone-deep satisfaction of knowing that you are capable of more than you thought. That you can look at the truth, even when the truth is ugly and inconvenient and changes every story you ever told yourself, and choose to stay anyway. Choose to show up. Choose the hard, real, imperfect version over the clean, comfortable lie. My mother stayed. My mother showed up. And she did it for 34 years, in a way that I never knew about and never thanked her for. I called her the Monday after Thanksgiving, before the turkey was even gone. I said, "Mama, I don't say this enough, but thank you for holding everything for all of it." There was her pause. The one I know now. And then she said, "That's what mothers do, baby." And that was everything. That was the whole thing. Some secrets don't stay buried because they shouldn't. Some truths are too big to live in the dark forever. And when they finally come out, messy and unwanted and lighting everything differently, they force you to decide who you actually are. Not who you thought you were. Not who it was comfortable to be. Who you actually, genuinely, fundamentally are when the foundation shifts and the story changes, and the only thing left is the choice of what to do next. My family chose each other. All of us. Even the ones who'd been kept out of the family, by choices none of us made. And that right there, that stubborn, complicated, inconvenient, extraordinary choice, is what I will carry for the rest of my life. If you made it this far, I see you. I really, truly see you, and I want you to know that means more to me than I know how to say. If this story hit you somewhere real, please hit the like button, because it genuinely helps more than you might realize. Subscribe if you haven't already. I drop new stories every single week, and I promise you, you do not want to miss what's coming next. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. You already know who that person is. And drop a comment right now with your city, your country, and the exact time you're listening. I want to see how far this story reaches. Every single comment means everything to me. Everyone. Thank you for being here.